She agreed to a loveless marriage until a forbidden passion changed everything. She had made her peace with it. That was what she told herself on the train west. That was what she told herself when the land outside the window changed from the soft green of Indiana to something wider and more demanding. That was what she told herself when she picked up the advertisement and read it for what must have been the 40th time, looking for the catch, the thing between the lines that would tell her she was making a mistake. She did not find it. What she found was a man who had been honest enough to write, "I am not looking for love. I am looking for a partnership. I have a ranch and a daughter and more work than one person can manage. I will provide a good home and fair treatment, and I ask only for help with the household and the child. Nothing more will be expected or required." Nothing more will be expected or required. She had read those words and felt the tension go out of her shoulders like a knot finally releasing after years of being pulled too tight. She had been expected and required her entire life. Expected to be grateful. Required to be agreeable. Expected to shrink. Required to disappear a little more each year into the particular shape that the people around her needed her to occupy. She had done it. She had been good at it. And it had cost her something she could not entirely name, some essential version of herself that had gone so long without air that she was no longer certain it was still alive. A loveless marriage with clear terms felt, in the exhausted arithmetic of her particular life, like freedom. She had agreed to it with both eyes open. What she had not accounted for was him. Not the man in the advertisement. Not the practical rancher who needed help and promised fair treatment and nothing more required. That man she had prepared for. That man she had built a whole internal architecture around, a way of being in proximity to without being moved by, a careful system of distance and usefulness that would let her live beside him without ever being in danger of anything as inconvenient as feeling. What she had not accounted for was the actual man, the real one, the one who turned out to be something the advertisement had not known how to say. Welcome. If you are new here, this is a place for stories that do not hurry. Stories that believe the slow things are the important things. Stories about the dangerous and inconvenient and absolutely unplanned business of falling in love when you had very specifically decided not to, with someone who had very specifically decided the same thing, and what happens to two people when the walls they built with great care and good reason turn out to be no match for who they actually are to each other. Stay until the end. Leave a comment when you get there. Tell us where you are watching from and what this story did to you, and whether you have ever tried very hard not to feel something and failed completely. And please subscribe if you have not already, because every one of you who stays is the reason we keep going, and we very much want to keep going. From the beginning. Her name was Eliza Crane. She was 32 years old, and she had spent most of those years being sensible. She came from a sensible family in a sensible town in Indiana, where sensible was the highest compliment, and anything that exceeded it was viewed with the particular suspicion reserved for things that might embarrass someone at church. She had been raised to be practical and modest and useful, and she had been all of those things with such consistent success that somewhere along the way she had stopped being entirely sure what she was underneath them. She had been engaged once. His name was William, and he had been appropriate in every way that the word appropriate can be applied to a person, which is to say that he fit the requirements without ever quite becoming real inside them. She had told herself she was content. She had told herself that content was enough, that it was in fact the sensible goal, that the wild, impractical alternative was the province of novels and the young, and people with more margin for error than she possessed. Then William had found someone else. He had not been unkind about it. He had been appropriate about it, which was its own particular injury. He had explained in careful terms that he had developed feelings for another woman that he felt honor-bound to pursue, and that he hoped Eliza would understand, and that he was certain she would find someone suitable. Suitable. She had sat in her mother's parlor after he left and looked at the wallpaper and thought, "I have spent my entire life being suitable, and I have arrived at 32 alone with a word that means good enough for most purposes." She had answered the advertisement 6 months later, not out of heartbreak. She was clear about that. William had not broken her heart because what they had was not the kind of thing that broke when it ended. It simply stopped, the way a clock stops when you forget to wind it. What he had broken, or perhaps what his leaving had finally broken open, was the story she had been telling herself about what she wanted. She did not want suitable anymore. She did not want to be required and expected and carefully managed into the correct shape. She wanted to be somewhere new, somewhere her history did not precede her, somewhere the wallpaper was different. The advertisement offered new. It offered clear terms and fair treatment and the particular freedom of a relationship that had named what it was and was not pretending to be anything else. She had taken it. His name was James Calloway. He met her at the station in a small Colorado town called Hartley on a bright, cold morning in early November, and her first impression was that he was taller than she expected and quieter than she expected, and that the advertisement had not mentioned his eyes, which were the dark brown of good soil, and looked at things with a directness that she found immediately disconcerting. He said, "Miss Crane," and shook her hand, and the handshake was brief and firm and entirely professional. She said, "Mr. Calloway," and picked up her bag before he could offer to take it, because she was 32 years old and had been carrying her own things for a long time. He looked at this, the small act of picking up her own bag, and something in his face registered it. Not negatively, just registered it, filed it, the way someone files a piece of information they find useful. They drove to the ranch in the kind of quiet that she had expected to find uncomfortable, and didn't. It was a good ranch. She could see that clearly. The land was well used and well managed, the kind of place that showed years of consistent attention. Not grand, not the kind of thing that announced itself, but solid in a way that spoke of someone who understood that reliability was worth more than impression. The house was plain and clean, and in the doorway, holding the frame with both hands and leaning forward with the momentum of a child who has been told to wait and found waiting cosmically unjust, was a small girl of perhaps 6, with her father's dark eyes and an expression of such fierce and barely contained welcome that Eliza stopped on the porch steps. "This is Bess," James said from behind her. "I know who you are," Bess said to Eliza, with the gravity of someone delivering important information. "Papa read me your letter." "Did he?" Eliza said. "You said you like to read," Bess said. "I do." "I have 8 books," Bess said. "Do you want to see them?" "Very much," Eliza said. Bess turned and went inside with the absolute confidence of someone who has extended an important invitation and knows it will be accepted. Eliza followed her. James came last. She heard him pause in the doorway behind her, and in that pause she felt something she could not name, some quality of attention, some specific kind of stillness in a person watching something they had not expected. She did not turn around. She followed Bess to the books. The terms of the arrangement were exactly as advertised. James was courteous and fair and maintained the particular careful distance of a man who had made a promise he intended to keep. He did not crowd her. He did not presume. He gave her the run of the house and asked her opinion on household matters, and treated her responses with the seriousness of a man who had asked a genuine question and expected a genuine answer, which was not something she had always been given. He did not talk much. She had expected to find this a relief, and she did find it a relief, and she also found, which she had not expected, that his silences had a quality she was interested in. There was a difference, she was discovering, between a silence that was empty and a silence that was full. James Calloway's silences were full. There was thinking behind them, feeling behind them, the sense of a person who experienced things deeply and did not make a performance of the experiencing. She watched him with Bess. That was where the wall first showed its weakness. He was not an effusive father. He was not the kind of father who swept a child into the air and spun her around and made everything a celebration. But he was present with her in a way that she recognized as rarer and more valuable than performance. He listened to what Bess said with his full attention. He answered her questions honestly, including the difficult ones, including the ones about her mother, who had died when Bess was 3, and which he answered in the plain, careful way of a man who had decided that truth gently delivered was kinder than comfortable evasion. He sat on the edge of Bess's bed every night and listened to her talk about her day. He did not rush her. He did not glance at the door. He simply sat and listened, and when she was finished, he said goodnight and tucked the quilt around her, and came out of the room with the particular expression of a man who knows that the best thing he does in a day happens in that room. And that is enough. Eliza watched this from the hallway the first time and made herself look away. She had made a wall. The wall was logical and necessary, and she intended to maintain it. The wall did not care about her intentions. It happened in small ways. That was the insidious thing about it. There was no single moment she could point to and say, "This is where it began." It was incremental. It was the accumulation of small, ordinary things that were doing something to her that she had not given them permission to do. It was the evening he came in from the cold and she had made soup without being asked, and he stopped in the kitchen doorway with the smell of cold air around him and looked at the stove and then at her and said very quietly, "Thank you," in a way that landed completely differently from how "thank you" usually lands, as if he understood that the soup was not really about the soup. It was the afternoon she was reading by the window and looked up and found him watching her, with an expression she catalogued quickly and carefully and put away in a locked room inside herself because she had no use for what was in it. It was the morning Bess had a bad dream and woke crying, and Eliza got there first and held her, and when James appeared in the doorway a moment later and saw the two of them, Bess's face against Eliza's shoulder, and Eliza's hand moving slow circles on her back, something in his face did a thing she was not going to let herself examine too closely. The wall was holding. Technically, the wall was holding. But walls are not made for feelings the size of these. Walls are made for weather, and what was building between them was not weather. It was something geological, patient and inevitable and happening far below the level where walls are built. She knew this. She was fairly certain he knew it too. They did not speak of it. They had an agreement. The first real crack appeared on a Tuesday evening in December. It had been a hard day. 2 cattle lost to the cold, a fence line down in the northwest section, a letter from the bank about the note on the east pasture that James read twice at the supper table, with a stillness that was different from his usual stillness, tighter. The stillness of a man holding something in because there is a child at the table, and the child does not need to carry it. Bess went to bed. Eliza was washing dishes. James sat at the table with the letter in front of him, and she could feel, from across the room, the weight of what he was not saying. She dried her hands. She came and sat across from him. She did not ask. She simply sat, the way he had taught her, without agenda, and made herself available to whatever needed to happen. He looked at the letter. He said, "My father left dead on this land when he died. I have been paying it down for 6 years. I thought I was closer to clear than I am." "How close?" she asked. He told her the number. She thought about it practically, the way she thought about most things. She thought about what she knew of ranch finances from these weeks of managing the household books. She turned it over. "The east pasture," she said. "What's the grazing capacity?" He looked at her. She looked back. They talked for 2 hours. Not about the feeling in the room, about the finances, about the cattle and the land, and the specific problem in front of them, and what could practically be done about it. She was good at numbers, had always been, and she was good at seeing systems, and she was good at the particular kind of clear thinking that becomes possible when you are applying your mind to someone else's problem because your own feelings are not in the way. By the time the lamp had burned low, they had a plan. Not a perfect plan, a real one. The kind that requires work and time and the acceptance that things will be tight for longer than you want. James looked at the paper where she had laid it all out. He looked at her. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know," she said. "This isn't what you signed up for," he said. "The advertisement said a good home and fair treatment. It didn't say you'd be solving my financial problems at midnight." "It also said partnership," she said. "I've always thought partnership meant the hard things too." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Eliza," in a way that was different from all the other times he had said her name. Different in a way she could not pretend not to notice, because the noticing was already happening in her whole body before her mind had any say in it. She stood up. "Good night, James," she said. She went to bed. She lay in the dark, and she had a very firm conversation with herself. The conversation covered the terms of the agreement, and the wisdom of those terms, and the reasons those terms existed, and the specific risks of departing from them, and the general historical reliability of feelings as guides to good decisions, which, in her experience, was not high. The conversation concluded with the firm resolution that the wall would be reinforced, and nothing would change, and she would be practical and sensible, and the whole thing would be managed without incident. She slept badly. January arrived with a cold that got into everything. There was a week where the temperature dropped to something that made the air itself feel dangerous, and the work of keeping the ranch going through that week was relentless and physical and required all of them, Eliza included, doing more than any of them expected. She found, during that week, that she was capable of more than she had known. She found that the self she had been compressing for 32 years into the shape of sensible and suitable had apparently been significantly larger than the shape allowed for, and that given room and necessity, it expanded into something she barely recognized and found, tentatively, extraordinary. She hauled water. She helped with the cattle in ways the advertisement had definitely not covered. She kept the house warm and kept Bess fed and occupied and calm during the days when the cold outside was frightening, and kept herself from being frightened in a way that would make Bess frightened, which required a kind of steadiness she had not known she had. James watched all of this. He did not say much about it. But one evening during that week she was sitting by the fire with Bess asleep against her side, and her own hands finally still after 14 hours of movement, and James came and sat across from her, and looked at her with those dark soil eyes and said, low and plain, "You're remarkable." She looked at the fire. "I'm practical," she said. "No," he said. "Practical is what you tell yourself. What you actually are is remarkable. They're not the same thing." She pressed her lips together. She kept her eyes on the fire. Her heart was doing something she was not going to acknowledge. "James," she said. "I know," he said. "We had an agreement." "I know," he said. "The agreement was sensible," she said. "The reasons for it were sensible. They haven't changed." "No," he said. They sat with that. The fire crackled. Bess breathed soft and even against her side. The cold pressed against the windows and the house held it back, the way houses do when they are well built and warm inside. And Eliza sat in the warmth and felt the weight of the thing she was not saying press against her chest from the inside, the way the cold pressed against the glass from the outside. She thought about the terms of the agreement. She thought about William saying, "suitable." She thought about the version of herself she had been compressing for 32 years. She thought about what it would mean to stop compressing. She looked at him. He was already looking at her. "I didn't come here expecting this," she said. "Neither did I," he said. "I don't know what to do with it," she said. "Neither do I," he said. She almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was so completely honest and so completely shared, and so entirely different from every other conversation she had ever had about feelings, which had generally involved one person performing certainty and the other performing response, and neither of them being fully present in the exchange. This was two people equally lost and equally honest about the being lost, and somehow that honesty was its own kind of solid ground. "I'm afraid," she said. "Of what?" he said. She thought about it. "Of needing something," she said. "Of letting it matter. I have spent a long time making sure things don't matter too much because when they do, and then they go, it takes something with it." She paused. "I made the agreement because the agreement was safe. Nothing could go wrong if nothing was expected." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I made the agreement for the same reason. After Helen died, I didn't want to do that again. Not the loving part, the losing part. I thought if I was just clear about what this was, then I wouldn't have to." He looked at his hands. "And then you came here and you were nothing like what I expected, and everything I didn't know I needed, and I have spent 2 months trying very hard to keep a promise I made before I knew who I was making it to." She looked at him. He looked at her. Outside, the wind moved across the roof. Bess made a small sound in her sleep and settled deeper against Eliza's side. "What if we made a different agreement?" Eliza said. He looked at her. "What if we agreed," she said, "to be afraid of this and do it anyway? Both of us. Equally afraid and equally willing." She paused. "What if we agreed that the wall was a reasonable idea at the time, and we are both reasonable people who have arrived at an unreasonable situation, and the reasonable response is to admit that?" Something in his face changed. It was the most complete change she had seen in a human face in a long time. Something that had been held very carefully for a very long time let go of itself all at once, the way a rope goes slack when the tension is finally released, and what was underneath it was so open and so warm and so entirely his that she felt it land in her chest and understood that it was going to stay there. He reached across the space between them. He put his hand over hers. She looked at their hands. She turned hers over. She held on. Spring came the way it always comes to Colorado, tentatively and then with full commitment, and with it came the ordinary daily beauty of a life that was not what either of them had planned for, and was therefore exactly right. Eliza put the sensible aside, not the practical. She was still practical. She was still the person who balanced the books and made the plan and thought about things clearly when thinking clearly was what was needed. But she put the armor down, the compression, the shape she had spent 32 years maintaining because the people around her had needed it to be that size. She took up the space she was actually meant to occupy. It turned out to be considerable. Bess noticed first, the way children notice everything worth noticing. One morning at breakfast, Bess looked at Eliza across the table with her father's direct eyes and said, "You're different." "Different how?" Eliza said. Bess thought about it with the serious, concentrated effort she brought to important questions. "Bigger," she said finally. "You take up more room, but in a good way, like you're all the way in instead of mostly in." James looked at Eliza over his coffee. Eliza looked back. She felt something in her face do the thing she had been preventing it from doing for months, something warm and unguarded and entirely her own. "All the way in," she said. "All the way in," he agreed. There was an evening in April, late in it, after the supper dishes and after Bess's books and after the day had been put properly to bed, when they sat on the porch in the first real warmth of the year and looked at the mountains going dark and gold at the edges, and Eliza thought about Indiana, about the wallpaper, about the word suitable and the word sensible, and the long, careful years of being exactly the right shape for everyone except herself. She thought about the advertisement that had said, "Nothing more will be expected or required." She thought about how wrong that had turned out to be. He had expected her real self. He had required her whole self. Not in the way of demand or imposition, in the way of a man who looked at her completely and wanted the complete version, the remarkable version, the one that was larger than she had been allowed to be. And she had required the same of him. They had required each other into being more fully themselves than the agreement had planned for, which was the best possible outcome of any agreement, which was the kind of ending that the sensible version of her would never have allowed herself to hope for. She leaned her head against his shoulder. He rested his cheek against the top of her head. The mountains held the last of the light. Everything was quiet and warm and entirely, completely real. She was not suitable. She was not sensible. She was Eliza Crane Calloway, all the way in, taking up the space she was always meant to occupy in a life she had not planned for and would not have traded for the most sensible thing in the world. She was home, and it was nothing like the agreement. It was so much better than that. If you have ever made a careful plan to protect yourself from feeling something and then felt it anyway, this story was for you. If you have ever been told you were suitable when you were actually remarkable, this one is yours. Leave a comment below. Tell us where you are watching from tonight. Tell us what stayed with you. Tell us if you have ever tried not to fall in love and failed wonderfully. And please subscribe if you have not already, because there are so many more stories here waiting for you, and we cannot wait to tell them. We will see you in the next one.